Alright, so we're back in a new video where, yeah, I was playing with black pieces. My opponent, 1970, so pretty good, but not up to snuff with the likes of me. I don't really know, but either way. This is going to be a pretty interesting game. So my opponent, of course, starts off the game with the most popular move E4. I go C6, D4, D5, ED, and CD, which is the exchange variation in the Caro-Kann. This is very popular. Yeah, my computer started up, but I mean, we're just gonna live with it. It's not really the end of the world if the error is just going to kill itself. But anyway, ED-CD, and my opponent goes main line, bishop D3. I go knight F6, which is what I normally play. C3 is the move here, which my opponent knows. I go knight F6. I mean, knight C6 was the move beforehand. Knight F6 now. Sorry about that. And my opponent plays knight E2, and I think for a while here. Now, I know that there's lines in the exchange Caro where you can play E6, and you actually don't develop this bishop for a while and turns into some type of like French position. But in those, I don't really like going into those lines. I really don't like blocking my bishop. I think that putting my bishop out, like to any square out on here, is just much better. Of course, not in this circumstance, not F5 right now, because that'll just be free bishop. But at the point, I end up playing the move bishop G4, which gets a little bit of inaccuracy, but at the same time, I really do just want to put my bishop on, to get my bishop out of the pawn chain before I play E6, so then I can actually live with myself and not have just a bad bishop for the rest of the game. So my opponent thinks for a while. As you can see, my opponent goes from 953 to 904, and my opponent plays move F3. And as you know, if you've watched Ben Feingold, whatever, this move is just not normally very good because it's very weakening on this diagonal in many lines. It's not really the same thing here because I don't really have a C pawn to exploit his D4 square, but at the same time, it's just never really a good idea to play F3, and I thought this was a major overcommitment for the issue of my bishop, which wasn't really doing that a whole much, because this pin is very easily sidestepped with a move like Queen C2, and I really didn't see why he would do this move. He did, and so of course I play bishop H5. Actually, the best move here is bishop all the way back to D7, which is kind of incredible. Again, with the idea of playing E6 in the future and blocking my own bishop in, but it's very interesting how that works. Anyway, I go for this move, which I think is much more reasonable, bishop H5, and my opponent goes bishop F4, which gets another inaccuracy from the computer. And I think for a while here, actually I don't think for that long. I play just normal move, I play E6, which is kind of my whole idea. Just play E6, and then I'm going to develop this bishop. Normally, with this bishop, I enjoy developing it to E7, where it can defend the knight against any pin on the G5 square. But in many lines, actually, bishop D6 is a bit favorable. Either way, my opponent castles, and I go bishop D6. With the simple idea of trading off the bishop, which I would love. If bishop D6, queen D6, I'd be happy. But instead of doing that, my opponent goes for this move, which is very interesting. My opponent goes bishop b5, which is actually a very interesting move. Putting pressure on my knight instead of my bishop. This bishop is always defended by the knight, and he thinks that if I trade like this, I'm trading on his terms, and he's going to bring his knight into a more favorable position where he can trade off for my light squared bishop in the future. But I don't know. That's why I didn't trade, obviously, because I didn't want to do that. So I just brought my bishop back to g6. I realized, okay, normally, you're not really supposed to move this bishop unless it's being attacked, but my bishop is doing absolutely nothing on this diagonal. It's targeting the F3 pawn of all things. Pawn is defended twice, so I didn't really see why I would keep it there, and I decided that it'd be better on this diagonal, on the G6 diagonal, that was just opened up for me from this bishop moving. Although, in retrospect, of course, the bishop is never actually threatening to take, because that would just open up my H file and I'd actually be better in that resulting position. So, queen A4, pretty good move, in my opinion. He's obviously trying. He has a little try here. He's obviously trying to take, and get something happening, get my king moving. Maybe I'll play knight d7 to defend it. Well, I would actually be forced, so I'd have to play this move, king e7, or maybe king f8, because the bishop would be, actually no, king e7 is the only move after that, but still, it's not something that I want to go into. So I thought here for a second. I found the best way, in my opinion, to stop this and defend my knight while also defending my bishop. And I play the move queen c7. The actual move here is just to allow him to take the pawn with castles, and this is hard to go for. This is very hard to go for. The best line is knight e8, which is just, I mean, if you can look at this position and just like say, yeah, I'm better here. I'm much better here. Like, I don't know. Like you reported. I no one is ever gonna play this way. Like this is mind-boggling like levels of gameplay here, because I mean I'm just freely down a pawn. I have the bishop pair, but my like four out of my 6 pieces are on the back rank, and he actually has just more development than me. So I don't really know why I would ever go for this. I guess the idea is that I'm going to ping pong his queen around with my rooks, and maybe I'll get something going there. But still, yeah, that's unplayable. So I go queen c7. Bishop takes, queen takes, and the move knight d2, developing the knight. Reasonable move. Of course, the move here that anyone would play would be either castles or some other move, but I decided to, instead of playing castles, I thought that, okay, if I castle, I didn't really think that this was as good as what I played, because castles doesn't really address the problem. Of course, it unpins myself from the knight, but I thought that a better way to do it would just be to play a6 immediately and just do this right off the bat. So, of course, takes, and I play queen takes. Thought this was reasonable. After queen c6, bc6, I thought I would have a better endgame here because my rook would get active on this file. I'm able to play c5 in the future after, maybe I won't castle, maybe I'll play king d7 and bring this rook over here. So this is where I'm going to put my 2 rooks, and I thought that I was just better in this endgame because I had a bishop. I might put my bishop here and wrap it around in some cases. I don't know. It's all like, it's all just ideas at this point, but still. I thought this was a better endgame for me. Computer, of course, hates me, but whatever. I don't know why I did to upset the computer so much, but it hates me. So it plays the move knight f4. Well, not it. My opponent plays the move knight f4, which is very reasonable. And I thought here, okay, knight is obviously wanting to trade for my bishop, so then we get into knight and knight endgame. And I thought, I think that the best way to do anything here is to allow knight g6, because I play rook b8 because to put pressure on this pawn. And after knight g6 is what my opponent played, I just thought, okay, hg, and now I have 2 open files for my rooks, and he only has 1 to work with. So I thought this was really, really reasonable, and I thought that I was probably slightly better here, and I didn't really see a way for my opponent to commence. My opponent does commence with knight b3, obviously continuing the plan of bringing his pieces forward and keeping everything developed. And I go with the move knight d7, which I thought was reasonable. The idea is that I eventually want to play the move c5. And I want to control the c5 square with my knight first, so that he can't do anything about it. Of course, rook ab1 comes to defend the pawn against whenever the knight moves, and I go knight b6 because I'm switching up the plan. So now I'm deciding to put my knight on c4, which pressures a lot of things. Pressures the pawn, and I might be able to go to this square if I double up on this file, or if this rook ever abandons the back rank. So knight a5, reasonable. King d7, defending the pawn, bringing my king 1 step closer, and the move b3 comes as no surprise to anyone, because that move is just quite reasonable. Just making sure the pawn is never attacked, and maybe he's preparing c4 at some point, but I don't really think so, because c4 actually weakens the d4 pawn like beyond repair. And I decided to get something else, because now, of course, my opponent is stopping the move knight c4. I thought, okay, where could my knight be better placed? Because the knight doesn't do anything now. I thought the knight could be better placed on maybe the d6 square, because then it could rotate to f5, rotate up here, it could put pressure on the d4 pawn. I thought that was very reasonable, so I go knight c8, obviously trying to reroute and go up that way. And my opponent plays c4, and what I told you earlier is that this move is very weakening. This move is very, very, very weakening. So I have to make sure. So he has to be very, very certain whenever he plays it, and it is not looking good for him right now. I go knight d6, obviously just putting some pressure on the pawn, keeping the tension. If he wants to push, that is a terrible move. That would be weakening the d4 pawn beyond repair, and then my rook can get in as well, and then I'm just winning. I'm just winning the pawn, and I'm just gonna win the game. So obviously that was a move. This is the move he plays, which is just wild. Like, why would you play this move? That is a wild move. And it loses. It loses for a very dank reason. I'm going to talk about this position a little bit more. Yeah, so knight f5 is the whole idea, obviously. I want to go here. I want to go here. I want to put pressure on everything. If I go knight f5, he has to keep this rook here, which actually is not very well placed. This isn't where the rook wants to be. The rook would rather be... This is the configuration I think he wants. Or maybe this rook... Yeah, I think this is the configuration I think he wants. So after this and rook here, of course, I'd have this fork. So he can't do that. And after this, I think that this rook is just stuck. So I thought that was very decent. My opponent goes a4, which loses to a very dank idea. A very dank idea that I looked at before this analysis. The move here that actually wins is just absolutely getting to an endgame that it's actually perfect for me with the move knight b7 and forcefully trading off the knights. Because after this, for example, after knight takes, rook takes, it's very hard to defend everything. Actually, it's impossible. It's impossible. He can't defend everything. He has to lose a pawn. He has to go like cd. I go probably ed. And then he'd go, I don't know. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what he play. He'd probably play like this, defending this pawn against everything. And then after even rook hb8, very simple. Rook d3. I at least have this idea of playing rook b4, and he can't actually defend himself at all because I'm very simply threatening rook takes a4 with the pin on the rook behind it. Sorry about that. I'm simply threatening that, and he just can't. He has no means of stopping it, like in any reasonable way. He can play this, and then I'll go here. He can play this, I win the pawn. So I'm just going to be up a pawn, and I'm just going to win the game because he has just too many weaknesses. And that's not something that I saw. I did not see the idea that after the knights are traded off, I would just win the game. So I go with my idea, and I play knight f5, which is a mistake, but it keeps some advantage. So it's not the end of the world. Of course, my opponent plays rook fd1, which somehow gets a great move. I don't know why. And I go rook b4, and I think this is reasonable because here I'm threatening a couple of things. I'm threatening, first of all, I want to bring my rook over. This is what I want to do. I want to bring my rook over, and then might bring my knight back. I want to take this pawn and keep this pin on this rook alive permanently. And then I just want to simply win a pawn, win the game, and go home and have a nice nap. So my opponent, after this move rook b4, plays another weakening move h3, clearly designed to get the king out. And I didn't really understand why my opponent would do this because I was already going to bring my rook over and he wasn't really addressing my threats, which is kind of the reason why I think he lost this game. And after rook hb8, again, actually, I have this idea of eventually trading up. No, the reason why this is winning this position is after king c7. Oh my god, what is this? cd, ed, rook bc1. Oh, I'm just gonna win the pawn. Okay, so what if he doesn't do cd? What if he plays, I don't know, king f2? King b6 just traps the knight. Okay, so I'm just starting to trap the knight and win the game. Well, that's not something I saw. I did not see that. I have to admit, I did not see that at all. Yeah, rook hb8 is the move I played. In retrospect, I probably should have found king c7 and just winning the knight, but either way, rook hb8, king f2. reasonable. Trying to bring his king over. This gets a miss actually because of rook bc1, which, I mean, you're not gonna play this. I mean, after takes, I feel like this is just like unreasonable. Like I don't really understand why someone would play this. The idea is, of course, to end up forking here, but I don't really understand rook bc1 in my opinion. It just doesn't seem right. So king f2, and I play knight d6. One more preparatory move, defending this pawn again, defending this attack again. It's not really defending of attack, but I don't know, putting more pressure here, and also threatening, of course, if this move c4 happens, c5 happens, I can just go back to knight f5, and this pawn is unguardable. So my opponent plays rook bc1, which is a reasonable move, and I simply play the move, which makes a lot of sense, and I'm winning a pawn after the move dc. And here my opponent resigns, which is pretty nice. He's down a pawn on an endgame. It's not over. It's actually not over. There's a ton of drawing lines here that I looked at, but this position is actually kind of hard to play with black, because even though I'm a pawn, there's many chances for me to blow it. Like if I trade a rook, like for example, let me show you. After knight takes, I would have to recapture with the knight, obviously. Now rook takes. If I take on c4 takes, and I go for something very simple like this is already like a lot, like hardly winning anymore. My opponent plays c5, and I take on a4. My opponent might be able to get in here and start threatening me along this file. In this case, actually just loses a pawn, but you get my idea. Anyway, yeah, there were some lines where it was very, very, very depressing, but yeah, my opponent just resigns here, which is I'm not sad about, obviously, because then I wouldn't like I might not win the game if he didn't resign, but still I feel like my opponent should have played on a little bit further, though it's not too unreasonable to see why he did it. So yeah, that was this game. It was a pretty nice end game. I think I was playing very well this game. Computer, of course, gives me many misses, but I think I still had the ideas down, and I think I got everything correct. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys found this instructive. Yeah, good evening and good night.